Hello, listeners. Before we start this month's episode of the Voices of Veterinary Medicine podcast, I want to include a short personal note. So, while Dr. McDonald is religious, I am not. I don't believe in God, and I don't believe in eternal life. So, when I talk about finding peace and happiness, and there being many paths to do that, I'm talking about finding peace and happiness in this lifetime. A few years ago, I would have read Dr. McDonald's book and rejected all of it because, as a secular humanist, there are some things in her book I disagree with. But what I'm starting to recognize is that rejecting people because I don't agree with everything they believe or because I disagree with anything about their worldview isn't helpful to me, nor is it helpful to the world. And I don't believe we have any chance of solving the problems we face until we learn how to have civil and respectful conversations with each other, despite our differences. I'm currently reading a book entitled Braving the Wilderness by Brené Brown, and this book directly addresses this issue. Brown urges in this book that we should cultivate the courage to brave the wilderness, and by that she means venture outside of our comfort zone, where the only people we talk to are those who think exactly what we think and believe exactly what we believe, or so we think. When my father was still alive, I struggled a lot with having to take care of him because he could be a really difficult person. Then I stumbled across a book entitled Battlefield of the Mind, written by a Christian missionary by the name of Joyce Meyer. Despite the fact the book contained many things that I vehemently disagreed with, such as the idea that meditation is evil, I still gained genuine wisdom from that book that helped me with my father, such as the idea that God isn't impressed when we're nice to nice people. It's being nice to difficult people that really demonstrates our good character. I didn't need to believe in God in order to benefit from Meyer's book, and I don't need to believe in God in order to appreciate Dr. McDonald's stories and advice. If you're a Christian, you're sure to enjoy the interview with Dr. McDonald. If you're not, she may say things you disagree with, but I urge you to listen anyway. Accept the gifts she offers. Accept her generosity and compassion. We don't need to be alike in order to get along. And we don't need to agree about everything in order to learn from and enjoy each other. And I very much enjoyed my talk with Dr. Mary McDonald. And if you're interested in picking up Dr. McDonald's book, The Magnet, A Large Animal Veterinarian's Journey, it is available on Amazon, and there's a link in the show notes to the Amazon page where you can purchase it. Thank you for listening. And now, here's the interview. Dr. Mary McDonald is a veterinarian, international aid worker, spiritual director, deacon, speaker, wife, mother, and author of the best-selling book, Starting and Running Your Own Horse Business. Her latest book is entitled The Magnet, A Large Animal Veterinarian's Journey. The book is a page-turner from the very beginning, opening with several engaging stories from her life as a large animal veterinarian in Virginia, and then tracing a winding path from her troubled childhood to running a cattle ranch in Texas, to her first work as a missionary, to her acceptance into the Virginia Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine in 1999, where she served as president of the Christian Veterinary Fellowship from 2000 to 2002. Dr. McDonald is currently employed with the Society for Anglican Missionaries, or SAMS, and runs her own business called Spend Yourselves LLC, where she teaches a course called FARM, which stands for Farm Animal Refresher for Missions. FARM helps prepare people who are interested in helping others in developing countries by teaching basic farm animal handling, nutrition, healthcare, vaccination, deworming, and foot trimming, as well as cross-cultural and evangelism training. In the past, Dr. McDonald was an adjunct professor at Virginia Tech, where she taught an introduction to the equine industry class to undergraduate students. From 2009 to 2012, while employed with the Christian Veterinary Mission, she spoke at national and regional conferences and veterinary schools including UPenn, Tufts, Cornell, Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina State, UTN, Purdue, Wisconsin, Illinois, Ross, and St. Kitts. She led short-term mission trips for both students and veterinarians to Bolivia, Uganda, and Nicaragua, and was a professor at the René Morales Veterinary School in Bolivia. Dr. McDonald lives with her husband and 2 children on a historic farm in Virginia. Well, welcome to the podcast, Dr. Mary McDonald. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for allowing me to come and to interview me today, and I'm looking forward to this time.
I've been looking forward to this for so long. I think we first touched base about 6 months ago. I saw something that you'd post on LinkedIn about your book. You'd published The Magnet, A Large Animal Veterinarian's Journey. And ever since then, I've been very curious about your journey. But so this interview is going to be a little bit different than most of my other podcast interviews, in that what I usually do is I allow my guests to tell the story of their lives. But you've already done that in your book, your wonderful book, which I enjoyed so very much. So it's going to be a little bit different this time. I do want to touch on a few things from your biography that I want to delve into a little bit more. First of all, so you, like me, took a circuitous route to veterinary medicine. And you started at Virginia, Maryland in 1999. And how old were you when you started vet school?
I turned 40 my first year.
Oh my God! That's amazing.
And I had two kids and a husband, and that traveled every other week. So I would advise any potential veterinary students to do it when they're single and no children. It's a lot easier.
Right, exactly. So I graduated when I was 42, but I did not have any children, nor did I have a husband. So much easier. Right. Yeah. So starting at age 40, were there other students in your class who were, in your age range, or that you felt compatible with personality-wise?
There were just a few. There were about 4 and my age, and the one I studied with the most, my study partner, she had been a news anchor, and she also had a different way to get to vet school. So we studied together quite a bit, and she's a veterinarian in Alaska right now. And she just married a news anchor out in Alaska. So
how funny. Wow. I think it's really good for future veterinarians to hear stories like yours, because, there's so much pressure that they put on themselves to get into vet school, and they're also young. And you don't have to do it necessarily when you're young. You can take a circuitous route. You can get all kinds of great life experiences like you did. Amazing, amazing things that you did before vet school. And I think probably those things are some of the things that helped you get into vet school. I think they were for me.
Yes. Yeah, I believe they were. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's good to have life experience beforehand so that you really know that you want to be a veterinarian, because it's an expensive course to pursue. And if you get out and you don't really like it as much as you thought you would, then you may have student debt, or you may not be in a position to change very readily. So yeah, I was glad that I did do some different things before I went to vet school. And I would recommend that to anybody who's potentially thinking about going to vet school.
I would too. I think it takes some of the pressure off. You don't have to do it right now, fresh out of undergraduate. And I don't think you have to pursue a master's degree or, take on more expensive educational loans in order to increase your chances. I mean, hopefully your grades are reasonable, but if you have really great life experiences, I think that can boost your chances.
It does count. They weigh all of that. So I think it's helpful. And also it gives you some maturity going into the profession, a little bit more credibility with your clients when you come out and you're not so young.
That's so true. Yeah, the gray hair helps me. So when you were going through veterinary school, you had 2 kids and a husband. And did you find it challenging to have to balance the rigors of your academic responsibilities with your wifely duties and your motherly duties? How did you?
Yes. My husband was wonderful, but It is a very hard curriculum. Vet school is very difficult. And unfortunately, there's a lot of extracurricular labs and things that are not even in the normal curriculum that you're sort of expected to go to and you need. I couldn't drag my kids to all of those, but I did take them to a few of the reviews. And I remember one time I took my daughter to this one about wound repair in cats. And the professor was talking about repairing the tissue. And afterwards, my daughter asked, why do cats need Kleenex? So I was like, not that kind of tissue.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, and I would take them to the clinic after surgeries and just to recheck the animals. And I remember we would make a game out of it with my son and guessing the names of the different animals or the ones they liked the best. And I remember he went to this one cage and he said, Mommy, look at this one's name. His name is Bites. I said, Bites? I said, don't pet that one. So he was in like first grade. So
that's amazing.
They kind of went along with me and they were very supportive. Whenever I had my exams, they'd write little sticky notes all over the place. It said 100 A+, you can do it. So, although I never did make a 100 A+ on any of my vet school exams, but I had the encouragement from the kids in my family. So that was nice.
That is wonderful. And Virginia, Maryland was wonderful in just letting you, bring them when you needed to reviews or to check up on post-op patients or ICU patients. That's great.
Right.
They give you that flexibility and support.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And having that emotional support as you went through vet school, because, it can be kind of lonely at times, especially you spend a lot of time studying by yourself. You have study groups too, but it can be a lonely time too for some.
Right, it can be. And I think it's very important to have a support group if you're going into vet school and family that's supportive, and also to have a church. I went to a good church and I think they actually prayed, and some of them take credit for praying me through vet school. So they take all the credit more than my studies.
That's funny. Yes. And I wanted to ask you, so you were the president of the Christian Veterinary Fellowship. And I remember this club when I was at Virginia Tech as well. I wasn't a member, but what sort of things did you do as the president of Christian Veterinary Fellowship? And what did your members do?
Right. Well, I remember the first time I went, I kind of dragged myself in, and Dr. Spanenberg, the pathologist, had seen all the freshmen, fear of the syllabus shock. And it was just a very encouraging group. We met every week and we did a little Bible study, and just to hear that others had made it through the rigors of vet school. And remember him saying it's a pressure cooker, and just need to stick with it. And you don't have to be the head of the pack. You don't have to be, but don't get too far behind either. But we also had conferences with other vet schools, other Christian Veterinary Fellowship groups around the country. And so we got to meet some other students that were doing the same thing from on the East Coast. And then Christian Veterinary Mission has vets that are working in many developing countries, 30 different veterinarians. And so they will take the veterinary students over on short-term trips where they can get some hands-on experience. And veterinary medicine in developing countries tends to be very different than it is here. So to give the students practical experience doing surgeries that they probably wouldn't get to do here, handling without the nice facilities that we have, was really good experience. So that's one thing that we do. And then we just do things to encourage the other students in vet school. We had organized dinners. Some of the local churches provide dinners, and then all the students during exams can come for a free meal. And so putting cookies and things like that in the students' boxes just during exam week to help them get through.
Oh,
so yeah.
That must have been a great source of support as well. And so, the hands-on experience that the members of Christian Veterinary Fellowship were able to get, it sounds like that's sort of what you're doing with your own company now. You've got a company called Spend Yourselves, LLC, and you teach a course that you call Farm. And tell me a little bit about that. And can anybody go to that? I mean, do you have to be a Christian to go to that?
No, it's called Farm Animal refresher for missions. And it's mainly for people that are going over into developing countries. And maybe they've been veterinarians, small animal vets, and haven't touched a cow or horse since vet school. Or maybe they are just want to go help maybe with the Peace Corps or something like that, but haven't been raised on a farm and don't know about cows or horses or chickens or pigs or goats. And so you can hear my rooster in the background. He wants to chime in here because we worked on him this past week. I just finished having a farm course, and we show how to vaccinate for some diseases that we don't have in this country, like exotic Newcastle disease and fowl cholera. And so we pretend practice on my chickens, so they get a little experience handling a chicken, grabbing how to vaccinate. And then particularly with the horses and cattle, where it can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. So we vaccinate, we castrate a bull calf, and dropped a cow down, trimmed feet.
Wow.
And then with the horses, we trim and we vaccinate and float their teeth sometimes. Sometimes we castrate. We have somebody to castrate, and then goats too, trimming the feet. So we try to make it very basic and vaccinate only for the things that you may vaccinate in, say, in the rural areas of Africa or South America, and without all the bells and whistles that we have here. Like, we don't use power floats to float horses' teeth. We use the manual floats. We usually use the nippers, not the Dremel tools, because there's not electricity in the villages that we go to. So we try to make it more primitive, but get good hands on. So a lot of it's safety, which end of the horse kicks. And I had a vet come one time, and he said, "Now, I remember something from vet school about the horse's ears. Is back good or bad?" I'm like, back is not usually that good. So, things like that. And then we teach something called participatory methodology, because like when I was in Bolivia, the schools only go to 4th grade, but in many of these rural villages, they don't know how to read. They're pre-literate. And in the United States, we use a form of education I like to call banking, where we cut everybody's head off and we drop in all the facts, expect them to regurgitate on an exam. But over there, they're used to oral storying. The chief will hand down the history, and they're used to learning orally like that. And so if you come in and teach kind of the way that we do in vet school, this banking method, it's not really effective at all, because they're not used to doing analytical reasoning, and they can't take your facts and look at the situation and vaccinate or deworm. So we do participatory methodology, where you do more skits and puppets, dramas, acting out, and hands-on. So we teach them how to, say, vaccinate a goat, and then we actually take them and they learn how to handle it and vaccinate it, how to draw up. And it's amazing how fast they catch on in the villages. I mean, they can do drug calculations faster than I can. And they learn with the weight tapes, and they vaccinate and deworm. And so we train them with that participatory methodology, but we train them with the vision for them to train the next person. So multiplication. So we do it, and then they would go and train the next village in animal health care, whether it's cows, horses, pigs, whatever the need kind of in that area is. And it's learner driven. It's called you find it what they call as a generative theme. It's kind of what is the thing that gives excitement. What is the topic in the village that they are excited about learning? So we don't go in as the American veterinarians and say, you guys need to do this and this and this. We ask them, what is it that you feel that are your assets? And what are some of the things that you would like us to help you with? So we do a survey of the village, which is asset-based, not just needs-based. We don't go in and say, well, you've got this and this wrong. We go in and say, wow, you've been living for thousands of years, surviving, raising cattle under these harsh conditions. That's fantastic. How can we come alongside you in what areas? And we go with what they want, not just with what we try to impose on them. So it's a little different way of teaching than they do here in the States. So.
Yes, but oh my gosh, I've never done any kind of missionary work or gone to third world countries to work as a veterinarian or even a veterinary assistant. So thank you for explaining to me,
Sure.
like the overarching theme. I didn't realize it's not just going in and spaying a few animals or vaccinating a few animals. It's actually teaching the people there how to carry on that work and how to teach it to the next people so that they're not dependent on you.
Exactly. And that's how the founder, Dr. Dormany, got started. He was in Dominican Republic, and he was working with this woman's goat, and he was getting ready to vaccinate it. And the woman said, "Oh, don't do that. Teach me to do it myself." So we teach them to do it themselves, but also with the idea that they're teaching the next person. We do a training called Training of Trainers.
Yes.
So we will go and well, when I was in Bolivia, I worked in Bolivia for 3 years. And so we had 5 villages that would come. They would pick the leaders in their village, and we required 1 woman and 1 man from each village. And they would come, and we did it every week for a year, once a month for a year. And we trained them to be like the barefoot vets. So they would go back at the end of the year, they got a little medicine box, and they learned how to sell like 1 cc of whatever the product was. So it's sustainable, because all of our work, we want it to be sustainable. It's holistic and sustainable. We don't take the drugs down from the United States that people donate to us with the American labels on them. We want them to use the products in their country that they can read and that they can get when we're long gone. So we always try to make it sustainable and not use things that they're not going to be able to have access to or can't afford.
Right. So. That was going to be my next question is where do the drugs come from? Where do the vaccines come from? And you mentioned that they don't have electricity, so no refrigeration, and vaccines need to be kept at a certain temperature to keep them from denaturing. So yeah, I mean,
exactly. Well, what we would go in and teach a village to do is what we call a vaccine campaign, where everybody in the village trying to get everybody on board. And so they will say it's for their chickens. So they will have to contribute maybe 10 cents for the vaccine. And they have to all get their chickens up by a certain time that day. So they'll contribute, they'll take the money, the guy will ride into the city on the bus and get a cooler and full of ice, and then have him come back, and by the time he's back, all the chickens and everything are up, and he can use the vaccine, and usually they get all finished just as the ice melts. So we teach them all about maintaining the cold chain, and that can be a very difficult thing to do out there. It has to have some organization. So we call it a village vaccine campaign. And everybody, because they're contributing, they have a stake, and they want to get their horses or their cows or whatever up and have them ready to be vaccinated right when the vaccine comes. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. I have always wondered about how that would work. So thank you for explaining that to me.
In some villages where they do have a human medical clinic, they have a solar powered refrigerator. And so they let us put the vaccines in their refrigerator too. So just depends on the village.
Okay. All right. Solar powered refrigerators. I didn't even know those existed. What a great idea. It's about time.
Yeah.
Well, so I know that we've got a limited period of time, and I want to be respectful of your time. So I'd like to, if you don't mind, just jump back a little bit to some of the topics that you covered in your book, because even though I'm not going to rehash everything in your book, because I'm going to encourage listeners to get your book, because I think it's amazing. It's really entertaining. I mean, I was hooked really from the first chapter, and I laughed out loud several times, in the beginning when you're telling your large animal story.
Good. Well, I was at a vet conference getting my CE in January, and I saw a vet friend, and I gave her a copy of my book, and she was sitting in front of me during a very dry lecture about some heart failure in cats or something, and all of a sudden she would just burst out laughing in the middle of the lecture when she was reading my book. So it is, I think it's meant to be humorous too. So.
Yeah. I don't know why, but large animal stories are always they're funny in some way. They tend to be. There's a lot of humor.
Yeah, once the bleeding stops.
Yes, exactly. Retrospectively.
Yeah. Exactly. Once the bleeding stops, they're a lot more funny. These disasters. Yeah.
Yes. But I enjoyed your book because it was entertaining, but also I do have to say, even though I'm not religious, I'm not a Christian, I felt a great sense of peace from reading your book. And I felt your compassion and your love for fellow veterinarians or future veterinarians coming through the pages. I just wanted to express that. It really did give me a feeling of peace, like the feeling of peace that you described in finding God. It came through to me, and I could appreciate that and sort of feel that myself vicariously through your words. But what I'd like to talk about, which I found really interesting, is and I think it might be not an uncommon theme in veterinary medicine, in veterinarians, that you had a very difficult childhood. You had some very tough times, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because that's all in your book. But and then later you talk about how winning became your passion, and you became wrapped up in being perfect or getting external validation for being great, for doing things well, and and I also had a difficult childhood, and I'm a perfectionist, and I struggled with the same things. And I wonder if these things don't sometimes go hand in hand. And I wanted to get your opinion on that.
Yes. Well, I think particularly in the veterinary world, it's hard to get into vet school. It takes a lot of perfectionists to go to veterinary school, and you have to perform to get in, you have to perform to stay in. So it sort of is a weeding out process to get the type A perfectionist personalities. And so I wrote the book to address that in some aspects, and that we are not just human doings. We are human beings, and we can't get our validation from all the things that we do. We have to realize that we have worth apart from that.
Yes.
And I also wrote it kind of my a spiritual journey, my faith journey, in hopes that it would encourage others. Like you said, and it's not a book for Christians. It's a faith journey of my spiritual journey, in hopes that other people could maybe walk some of the same path that I've walked through health and healing. And I think particularly, as you pointed out, our profession has the highest number of suicides, 4 times more than any other profession right now. And I think a lot of times, some of it is from our backgrounds. My background, both parents were alcoholic, the death of my mother, sexual abuse. And so many of us turn to our pets for solace.
Yes.
And we want to return that love to them and become veterinarians.
Yes.
But we never necessarily feel or get healing in these hard areas from our childhood. And so I spoke a little bit about my journey through that with my book, and how God has brought that. And he's called the master physician and the lover of our souls. And so I want people to know that there is more, that we have value because we are his beloved. We have value apart from whether we pass that test or that do well in that exam, or if we're top of our class, or if we have the highest, the best caseload, or we do a great surgery, or a 10-minute spay. We have intrinsic worth and value apart from all of that. And if all of that falls apart, we are still totally God's beloved and of such great value.
Right. And I'm trying to cultivate this feeling more myself, trying to disconnect my feeling of self-worth from the things that I achieve or don't achieve.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
hard. It's very difficult because everything in the world in our profession gives validation from that, you know, and
it's external
so,
validation.
Exactly. But it's really the internal validation that we are dearly loved and of deep value, you know, if we're in a wheelchair or no matter what we're doing.
Right. And there was another thing that you wrote in chapter 19 about your experiences in Kenya. And at that point, you were married. And you know, you talk about the honeymoon period, and then you realize, oh, this is a complex human being sharing my life, and sometimes there's conflict. So you guys ended up going to a marriage counselor, and in this chapter, you talk about how the counselor is explaining to your husband that because of your childhood, your difficult childhood experiences, that you are hypervigilant.
Yes.
Yeah. And that hypervigilance is something that I feel all the time. And that's what makes me, I think it made me get good grades. It made me, you know, excel at everything that I've tried to do because I am like this all the time.
Yes. Yeah. And my husband would get mad because he would come up behind me, just walk up behind me in the kitchen, and I would jump, and I would jump and I'd scare him. So, and kind of whether it's post-traumatic stress syndrome or growing up in a violent background childhood, you can develop this hypervigilance. And until you kind of unpack that a little bit, you're not even aware of it. You just think that that's normal.
Yes.
And adult children of alcoholics, they have a normal, their normal is not everybody else's normal. So right. Even the chaos in relationships, that's what they're used to. Yes. So I would be, our relationship was going along, my husband was just going along pretty level, pretty flat, pretty calm. But because that wasn't my normal, I would just throw in a little grenade, you know, and blow things up to make it a little bit more chaotic. Right. And so I think people do that with that, who have had a dysfunctional background, and maybe they're not even aware of it. And unfortunately, it causes broken relationships and divorce and heartache. And the same with sexual abuse. You know, they're thinking nearly 50% of women in this country have been sexually abused. And with the hashtag Me Too, you know, that's coming out more and more now. And so I would just encourage any women that have been abused or adult children of alcoholics or whatever the issue is, maybe from their childhood, to go ahead and be willing and courageous to jump into it and use that same drive that the abused to get through vet school or to be a professional for themselves, for their own healing. Because I think sometimes we're always we put our own souls on the back burner, and we really need to do some soul tending to get health and healing for ourselves, but also for our husbands and for our children, our clients.
That's right.
You know, because it's a ripple effect of dysfunction if we don't. So, and then certainly. I think the Lord really does use that once we've had some healing to help other people who are going through this.
Yes. And you know, what you were saying really resonated with me because I wasn't sexually abused. I wasn't physically abused. But my father had a terrible temper, and my mother was very meek. And so there was a lot of psychological abuse in our household. And you never knew. And I suppose it's similar to, you know, having an alcoholic in the family. It's very unpredictable. You never knew what was going to set him off. It could be nothing. And so that's where the hypervigilance develops. Like, because life is so unpredictable, because, you know, your parents are, you can't necessarily trust them, right? You don't trust. That's where the hypervigilance comes from, and having to be perfect to try to stave off that unpredictable, you know, temper tantrum, whatever. Right.
And it serves us well in our childhood in that we survive. it enables us to survive those tumultuous years, but it doesn't serve us so well in our adulthood, in our adult relationships,
Yes.
in a safer environment.
Yes, exactly. It makes it very difficult to trust, right? If everything's going normally, you're like, what are you really thinking? What's really going on? I know there's more going on here, you know? So that's like the wrench that you talk about throwing in. And I've done that too in my relationship with my husband. And so I'm learning to trust day by day too, and to come to terms with the triggers that come from my childhood. But it's really interesting how you talk about, so getting back to Christianity and the sense of peace that it's and the healing that it's given you, you talk about during your interview at Virginia Tech for vet school, there was like, you disagreed with something one of the interviewers said, and it was not important. But when you're the one in the seat trying to get into vet school, you're like, I've just ruined my chances. And you talk about having that worry and anxiety. And then you say, you talk about talking to God and you say, your will, Father, not mine. And you're able to let go of that anxiety.
Yes.
And I feel like this is what, this is a part of the healing that Christianity has given you is, instead of being hypervigilant and feeling like you have to control everything, you're able to recognize that not everything is within your control. And sometimes we just need to relax and allow destiny to take its course and trust that things will be all right.
Yeah. And to realize I'm not the CEO of the universe. And I don't have to be. Because we've got a CEO of the universe, and he's done a great job. And so I think that kind of surrender, like, okay, it takes a lot of the pressure off knowing that there is a creator who created the universe, who created me, who created this little situation that I might have created the situation, but he's gonna get me out of it. So I think there is a surrender in that and a peace that comes. I think Christianity's kind of gotten a bad rap, and I don't even like to say I'm a Christian anymore. I just say I'm a Christ follower, because it's not a religion, it's a relationship with Jesus Christ. And as you have that daily relationship, then you can have peace. And his name is also called the Prince of Peace. And so if I want to follow somebody who's the CEO of the universe and also the Prince of Peace, then that to become Christ-like is my goal, and to have that peace and to share that love with others too. It's really, God's name is also love. In the Bible, his name is love. So to be able to share that with others and to help other people to find that peace in that relationship where they can know, they can know it. They can talk to God. They can experience his forgiveness and his care. And we don't have to be the CEO of everything.
Right. And totally respectful of the fact that you're a Christ follower, but I'm not. I'm trying to find that sense of peace in my own way. Yeah. And we're all works in progress, and who knows? But
absolutely.
It goes back to why you called your book The Magnet. Can you explain that to people? I mean, perhaps anybody who's gone through vet school probably knows what the magnet is and can get an idea of the metaphor that you're making. But if they haven't, can you, for their benefit, explain what is the magnet? And what is this metaphor?
Yeah, and I don't know if you can, if I hold my book up, I have a picture of magnet on the back. Will that show up or not? But this is the magnet right here, and it's about as long as my finger.
Yeah.
And cows are indiscriminate eaters, and so they don't have any top teeth, so they use their tongue to just rip off the grass and swallow it. And they pick up anything that may be in the pasture, like a nail or a bit of wire. And when they swallow that, their stomach, or part of their stomach called the reticulum, the grinding motion can have that nail perforate through, and the big organ that's sitting right there is their heart. So they can perforate through to their heart, where they can just bleed out. Or more often what happens is they start laying down this scar tissue called fibrin, and it restricts the heart. beating, and it causes them to get unthrifty and to waste away. And so what we do as veterinarians, we take these magnets and we put them in with a pill gun, a bolus gun, and they land in the reticulum. And so when a cow does swallow a piece of wire, it will stick onto the magnet and won't perforate through. And so that's the magnet. And we as people, we kind of ingest a lot of hardware ourselves. They call that hardware disease or traumatic reticuloperitonitis. But there's an ancient church father, St. Ignatius, and he said, the glory of God is a man whose heart is fully alive. And so I feel like a lot of us, myself included, because of the scar tissue, we can put up defenses around our hearts, and we cannot live fully from our hearts. And so I like to make the analogy that we too have a magnet. And I remember this old preacher, this old farmer, gave his cows a magnet because his cow had hardware disease. And he said, "This'll preach." And he took the magnet and he said that he would say to his parishioners that Jesus is their magnet and takes up the wounds from, divorce or kids on drugs or student debt. So that's kind of the analogy why I named it the magnet, because I feel like God does that in our own lives too. So.
It's really a beautiful analogy. If you don't mind, Dr. McDonald, I'd like to read a passage from the book that particularly struck me. It's in chapter. It's in the chapter entitled "Jack, My Two-Legged Knight in Shining Armor." But this is again a conversation that you had with your marriage counselor when you were trying to work through some of those childhood issues that you had.
Sure.
All right. It starts on page 184. And you say, "I asked many questions about why the things that happened to me did. Finally, my counselor told me a joke about the kid who was pedaling his bike down a country road one day as he passed a farmer struggling in the field. The farmer yelled out, 'Hey, son, can you give me a hand?' The farmer was exhausted from trying to help his cow deliver an oversized calf. 'I've been pulling this calf for an hour and I'm plumb tuckered out. Will you grab that leg and pull on this one?' 'Sure,' the boy said, jumping in to help. After 2 good heave-hoes, the big black calf was delivered. The farmer reached into his pocket to give the boy $1 for helping. 'No, sir, you don't need to give me nothing. Just answer me one question.' 'What's that, son?' 'Just how fast was that calf going when it ran into the back of that cow?' My therapist said. Like that boy, your therapist told you, you aren't asking the right questions. You're asking the whys. But contentment often means finding peace with life's unanswerable questions and learning how the Lord will bring you healing and use your life's pain to help others. We can be broken like glass and cut others with the shards from our trauma, or we can be broken like bread and nourish others like Jesus's broken body at communion." I thought that was beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
And another really, really wonderful analogy. I like pointing out that the why questions, the unanswerable questions, are not the right questions. It's coming to peace with not knowing. But also, it's such a beautiful concept that you could be broken like glass versus being broken like bread, because so many of us are broken like glass. And like we were talking about before, we end up hurting ourselves and we end up hurting others.
Yes.
And the cycle of trauma.
And others, the like broken glass. It pricks, or we can nourish others from our pain, like broken warm bread, the consecrated bread of communion, even the healing bread of Christ.
This is a really, really beautiful concept. And it just made me think about, people who want to go into veterinary medicine, they want so much to help. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
They want so much to do good things. And yet we get through vet school, we start practicing, and it can be emotionally difficult to practice medicine, whether it's large animal, small animal, whatever, especially when you're dealing with your own issues of perfectionism and needing that external validation all the time. and we start cutting ourselves up with our broken glass, and we cut other people that we're interacting with, and they have their own broken glass, right? We don't need to add more broken glass. We're all walking around like giant piles of broken glass. And it's so important for veterinarians, for future veterinarians and current veterinarians, to be able to find this, whether it's via Christ and Christianity or some other route, to be able to find that sense of peace and self-acceptance and compassion for ourselves and others in order to do the helping things that we so much want to do without hurting ourselves and without hurting others.
Absolutely. And I think, too, we have a rare opportunity as we help to end suffering by euthanizing to speak into this transient place of the living and then the not living. And where does that life go? In the supernatural. And I think it's really important. I'm a spiritual director, too. I help people from all different or faith backgrounds or no background spiritually on their journey to kind of come to grips with, so what is the supernatural, and is there life after death? And I think as we every day are faced with that as veterinarians and helping the owners of these beloved, some of the 80-year-old wife, and all she has left is her husband's, 15-year-old dog, and she's having to put it down. How do we help that person in that very difficult time, emotionally, but also supernaturally and spiritually? And I have a dear friend, she has a practice in Williamsburg, and she has a chapel in her clinic. And she actually does the euthanasias in the chapel where they can, just light a candle and sit and just feel kind of that transient space between life and death that we're all going to face personally, but many of us will have our pets face it as well. So.
Yes. And, I one of the reasons that I look forward to talking with you so much was not only your book, but also because, I went through a period when I was young, when I was very religious. I was a Christian. And then I went through a period of rebelling against that. And, I was a militant atheist. And, when I first started practicing, I still considered myself an atheist, and people would say things to me about like, well, he's going to go to heaven or whatever. And it would bother me, but I've come to realize that it doesn't matter. That's what they believe, and that's what gives them peace. And that's all that matters. That is all that matters. Right. And do I know it's not true? No, I don't. So to be able to support somebody based on their needs and not my needs or our needs is so important.
And I was at a funeral yesterday. A young couple in our church had a baby born with some congenital deformities and lived 26 days. And then just to see that little casket up there yesterday in the front of the church, foot-long casket. And for them to know and have that assurance that they will see this baby again, it brings great comfort. And like you said, we don't really know. We can't, God has not sat down at my kitchen table in bodily form. I feel like I've felt his presence many times, but if I'm wrong, what do I have to lose?
Right.
But if somebody else someone who doesn't believe is wrong, they've kind of missed out on this life of peace and knowing God now, which makes me sad. And then for all of eternity too. So, I think everybody is on a spiritual journey, whether they even know it or not. This country with all the yoga studios and all the things, everybody has got a little spiritual piece. And I think God honors that right where you are, atheist and any faith, that he enjoys people who are seeking something beyond the temporal, beyond the material, and he seeks to be in relationship with them. So I think that's important. And that was the journey that I was on. I didn't know what I believed. And when my mother passed away, what had happened to her, I didn't know. Mortality rate's about 100% still. And so I didn't know what was going to happen to me. Right? So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. What you just said made me think of a joke, but I think it might be in poor taste. I heard this joke, and I'll take it out if you don't like it, but it just made me think. I remember somebody saying to me once, life is a sexually transmitted disease from which we all die.
That's true.
It's in poor taste, but that's sort of what you were saying when you're like, mortality is around 100%.
Yeah. And it used to be in Queen Victoria's day, they spoke a lot about death and never about sex. And in our day, we speak a lot about sex and rarely about death. And both are true. But I think we're very afraid, fearful to embrace death in our country. It's a very young culture. Hollywood's, it goes for the young. And I think we're just afraid to talk about it because nobody has that firm relationship where they know that they can have that gift of eternal life. They can know that, as they embrace a faith, it starts eternity for them. And they can just walk into that like going through the swinging doors, and death is not something to be feared at all, but really it is a joyous time. I know my
I'm sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah. My cousin's son had cancer. He was 10 and he wasn't doing well. And she took him to the emergency room and she said, "Bo, are you doing okay?" And he said to her, "Mom, quiet. Jesus is calling my name." And she walked around from the driver's side to get him out of the passenger side, and he was gone. Mm. And so he had that assurance, Jesus has called his name and he went to be with Jesus. So I think it'd be better for Americans if we did talk a little bit more about death and the afterlife.
Well, and this is like my not accepting Christ and forsaking eternal life. That's like the one catching point that I have. And my hope is that if there is a God, your God, if that's the real God, that, he'll look at me and say, you're a good person and you've done the best you could. And I'm not going to send you to hell just because you refuse to call yourself a Christian. That's all I wanted to say, just in defense of people who haven't come to Christ the way you have. Maybe they will someday, maybe they won't. But I do believe that there are many paths. And as you were saying, your God appreciates all endeavors to find this peace, whatever path you may be on at the moment. But back to death and the fear of death and like the not wanting to talk about death. I wonder if that goes back to like our desire to achieve, and we want to be so much, and we don't allow ourselves to just be small and not the CEO of the universe. And my fear of death is I'm running out of time, and there are all these things that I still have left to do and want to achieve. Right. That's what I think about. And I think many people do. Like, I don't want to run out of time because there's so much I want to do. But like you said, we're human beings and not human doings. And I think that was, do you remember where the original quote came from? Was that
I don't.
The author of the Seven Habits of Highly Effective People or something? I think he's the one who said it.
Maybe.
Yes.
I don't know. I think so. And I think that we don't value the stages of life. Like, we don't value our elders. When I would go and work in Uganda or Kenya, they really value their elders and the contribution they can still make to society, even though they're old, they're a little senile, and they're a little blind, a little deaf. Yes. And so we don't look forward to retirement or those years when we really do have a lot of wisdom that we can help society with. So I think that's a area that we are lacking in respecting the elders. I think other cultures do a lot better job, and we could benefit not only from learning from them, but from looking forward to being an elder and not thinking our life is over, but we can still have great value.
What a great, absolutely. Wow. And like that must be part of what causes such high rates of depression and loneliness in older people, is They have all of this life experience and no one to talk to and no one who's listening or interested in hearing. And what a tragedy and what a waste. Yeah,
Yes.
I agree. I think that we need to do something about that. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So is there any specific advice that you would like to offer future veterinarians that, perhaps we haven't talked about yet?
I just, I think that they can use their profession in a variety of ways. People think sometimes all they can do is go into private practice, but I've enjoyed my degree. I'm just a large animal veterinarian, so I tell people unless their hamster weighs 500 pounds, don't bring it to me. But I've been able to use it overseas quite a bit. I do a training here on my farm here. There are a lot of different avenues that you can go in and use your veterinary degree in. You've doing this outside the box with your veterinary degree. And I think veterinaries can speak to veterinarians in ways that others can't. I mentor the vet students at Virginia Tech. They come out here and they just crash on my sofa and they complain about pharmacology. And I can relate to that pressure. And people outside of that, they don't get it. No. They're like, my mom and dad, they don't get it. They just said, why don't I just come home every weekend? And they're like, Mom, I really have to study. And so I think that we as veterinarians, we can encourage the next generation of veterinarians. We can mentor them. And we can not take ourselves quite so seriously when we realize that there's no need for us to have to be in charge of the entire universe.
Right. Or be perfect, get everything right. And
right. I came up with a motto in vet school, trying to take care of my kids and my husband and vet school and my house. Wow. I can do all things poorly.
I love that. Yes.
Yeah. And once you can kind of be at peace with that, like when I say that to veterinarian students, they don't like that. But you laugh because you understand it now. And when I went to Bolivia and tried to learn Spanish at 44 and do that, I said, I can do all things poorly, So to be at peace with that,
yes,
and not be a perfectionist, it can just take the pressure off.
It's so important. And future veterinarians are so focused on getting, A's in organic chemistry and biochemistry and acing their vet school interview. And then when they get into vet school, the struggle's not over. There's exam after exam after exam and so much information and putting so much pressure. And I'd really encourage them to read your book and to think about the concepts, whether, it's in Christian terms or other spiritual terms, but to really take to heart the message, how important it is to realize that we're all broken and that our biggest task is not to become veterinarians, is not to get an A on an exam, but it's to try to become broken like bread rather than glass. And so that we don't continue harming ourselves or others as we get into this field, when all we ever wanted to do by going into veterinary medicine was to help. So I thank you so very much for this beautiful book and for talking with me.
This time. I really enjoyed it. And I think of that saying that we treat, but God heals. And I remember when I first started working, my boss said, if a cow wants to die, there's nothing you can do to save it. If he wants to live, there's nothing you can do to kill it. So it takes a little bit of the pressure off of us.
Yes,
so we treat, but God heals.
Yes. And in vet school, when you're learning all of those things about medicine, and I sort of got the idea it was all up to me. Like, yes, I have the control. I'm going to save. And sometimes you do everything right and they still die. Or sometimes you make a mistake and they live. Or sometimes you make a mistake and they die. But we are not omnipotent. We are not gods. We are just humans. And coming to a point where we can accept our imperfections and accept that when things go wrong is going to be crucial to the psychological well-being of future veterinarians and present.
Yeah, and I think that's a big factor why the suicides are high, and people don't value veterinary medicine as much. They expect the gold standard of care, but they don't want to pay for it.
Yes.
And they don't appreciate the vet school loans that these students are coming out with, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I think there are a lot of factors, but I just want to say to any veterinarians that are listening to this, that there is always hope. There is always an alternative to suicide. And I know there are a lot of suicide hotlines and and if you want to talk about your spiritual journey, I'm a spiritual director. I'd love to, we could Skype or come to my farm and talk. But there's always an alternative to suicide. And my mother tried to commit suicide several times. My grandmother did. So I'm pretty aware of the depression that goes into that, and the feeling of no other alternative, no hope. But there is hope. But when you commit suicide, you don't end it. You leave broken lives and tragedy in the lives of your children and your husbands and your family. So you're not really solving any problems. You're just making them for other people. And as veterinarians, we can do better than that. We also can be more courageous than that, and we can seek health and healing, because I believe God allowed me to go through the trials with my family, my mother's alcoholism and suicide attempts and death and sexual abuse, in order for me to be a help to other people and even to write this book. And Mary Oliver is a poet, and she said that someone once gave me a box of darkness. And it's taken me years to understand that too was a gift. So a lot of times we have a lot of darkness in our lives and we can't get through it. We can't see through it. And sometimes it takes years to work through the darkness and depression and get healing. But then we realize that too is a gift, and we can use it to help others that are going through the darkness. And
absolutely.
That box of darkness is really a gift. So,
in fact, I think it may be necessary for us to suffer in order to learn compassion. Yes,
I think so. I don't really trust you say you never trust a skinny cook, right? I don't ever trust a skinny cook, but I don't really trust the counsel of someone that's never had any trials, never really worked through stuff. If they haven't done the hard work, the hard work and the heart work, then,
Yes. And it is hard work. It doesn't just come. And this is, I think, perhaps one of the most important messages is, in the society that we live in, everything is, right now, instantaneous, right? And what we're talking about is something that you work at every single day. And it's hard to have the discipline to do it. But, I really want to emphasize that there's no quick fix. It has to be worked at every single day, and not from the point of view of perfectionism. Like, don't beat yourself up if you haven't done it today, but to recognize that it's a process is so important, and to keep going.
It does. And it takes courage, and it is the best investment that they can ever make in their own lives, is to get health and healing and to be on this journey. It is a journey, emotional, physical, spiritual journey, until we reach the finish line. And we're either in the race or we're sitting on the sidelines. And if you're sitting on the sidelines, you're really not going to ever experience the richness and depth of healing and health, and be a resource for others for their healing and health. And Pascal says that there's a God-shaped void in every human heart, and we try to fill it with all these other things and idols, the idol of our profession, the idol of our, whether it's our car or our education or whatever it is. And C.S. Lewis says that idols always break the hearts of their worshipers. And so at some point, that veterinary degree, if you're depending on that as your idol, your heart's going to get broken, because you're going to lose a case, and you're going to have a client that just hates you for no good reason.
Yes.
And that's your idol. It's going to break your heart eventually. Yes. And so you have to have your self-image based on who you are as a beloved, as a great worth, apart from whatever you do. So.
And to that, I will say amen.
Amen. Good. See, I already got you saying amen.
And Dr. McDonald, before we wrap up, do you have a favorite charity that you would like to mention so that listeners can consider making a donation if they'd like to thank you for your generous time and advice today?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I work with a group called SAMS, SAMS. It's the Society for Anglican Missionaries and Senders. And I have a goat project in Uganda. I go every year. It's a revolving goat loan. And so the first woman gets a pregnant goat, and then the first offspring she gives back into the program. So it's a revolving goat. And so I go and take students there to learn how they can use their profession to help others in developing countries. So, it costs money because the goats are free for the woman, and I have to fly over there. So if anybody wants to donate to SAMS under Mary McDonald, Dr. McDonald, that'd be fabulous. And the way SAMS is set up is for the goats. If you buy goats, if it's a project, they don't take out any overhead. So if you send, say $140 for a goat, I get $140 to buy a goat. So that's a pretty good deal there. So
good to know. And is there any other way for people to get in touch with you? Perhaps they might want to take your class or take you up on your offer for,
yes. If they wanted to email me, might be the best way. It's Mary McDonald, MC, at SAMS, SAMS -USA.org.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. And if there's anybody that has heard this message and they just want to talk, if they're, or if they read my book and there's something in the book that they feel like they are kind of working through in their own lives, I am open, I'm always open to talking and emailing or whatever. So
that is wonderful. Yeah. That's a very generous offer. Thank you so much. All right. Dr. Mary McDonald, thank you so much for your generous time. I've had such a good time talking to you. And thank you for this beautiful book that you've written.
Yes. Well, thank you, Doctor. And I really appreciate you having this blog here and getting out things to help other veterinarians. So thanks. And may the Lord bless all the work of your hands.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.